Absolutely.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming. Welcome to Ready for Anything. If you did not get a handout, if there wasn't one on your chair, there are some in the back on the table, so feel free to help yourself. Also, if you would take this time to please silence your cell phones, small children, other noise-making devices. Let me start with introducing myself. My name is Melissa Randalls. I'm a graduate of Alpine Valley School. I graduated in 2003, and I attended here for 5 years. I came back this year as a staff member, and I'm working on being a triple threat as a parent in about 4 months and 5 years. Tonight I'll be acting as the MC and the moderator for our Q&A and during our speeches. So if there's one thing I've learned over the last 5 months, that being a parent is terrifying. And it's basically the most vulnerable thing you can do. And for me anyway, I want to know that I'm doing the right things. And I think we all do. We want to know we're making the right choices for our kids. And when I used to work in the corporate world, one of the big things was this phrase, measures of success. And we threw it around so often it became almost meaningless because it was used so much. But I think as parents, that's really what we're looking for. We're looking to see the success of our choices and know that we're doing the right thing. And for me, I like hard data. I like numbers. I like facts. I like things I can look at and go, yeah, that's good. Science says I'm doing this right. And there's not a lot of that at Alpine Valley. Because in the educational system, traditionally your hard data is test scores. It's grades. And we don't do that. And we don't do it for great reasons. But it can be scary. Because what you're left with is feelings and observations and things that feel a little soft and maybe not so firm. And so that's why things like tonight, events like this, are so important. Because as graduates, we have a different perspective. We can look back on our time at AVS and our time since AVS, and we can paint this path of the choices we made as students and where they led us in our adult lives. And it's really a unique perspective of the people who lived it. And so that's why we want you all to hear from some of our graduates and have the opportunity to ask those tough questions, those things that are keeping you up at night, of the people who lived it, and give you the opportunity to poke them with sticks a little bit. So why did we choose the name Ready for Anything? Well, because it's one of the most powerful things that people who graduate from AVS take with them into the world, is this resilience. We learn as students to handle challenges. We learn that life is not always easy. And we learn that we're responsible for our choices. Not an adult, not a teacher, not some authority figure. We are responsible for our lives. And we also learn something that may come to annoy the rest of the world, which is that we have a voice. And then we use it, and we never stop using it. And it's really pretty great. So we find that when students are here at Alpine Valley, the practice of overcoming adversity, taking responsibility for themselves, and being respected produces adults that are resourceful, happy, and successful. And just for a second, what does it mean to be successful, right? Because everybody has their own definition of that. Your definition may be money, or happiness, or doing something that you love. And what I think is unique about AVS students is that we are uniquely prepared to understand what we define as success when we're 18 years old. And that's just unheard of. And then we spend the rest of our lives pursuing whatever that is. But you don't just have to take my word for it. We have 3 amazing Alpine Valley School graduates here with us this evening who have gone out in the world, done interesting things, and they're here tonight to share their stories of how they've overcome challenges, how Alpine Valley prepared them to be ready for anything. So I'd like to just briefly introduce Keenan Quinn, Aubrey Alford, and James Cashabos, who are our speakers this evening. Each speaker will take the stage and share with you a story of a challenge that they've overcome in their lives. After that, we'll open it up for your questions. I'll be fielding the questions, and then giving them to the different panelists to answer. So just jump right in and raise your hand when you're ready, and we'll tackle your question. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first speaker, Keenan Quinn.
Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk about raising happy and healthy children, or a child. Recently, my beautiful girlfriend Brittany and I have been raising Lily, who is a very precocious 3 years old. And it's terrifying. I mean, just mind-numbingly terrifying, because I went from responsible for me to responsible for another human being 24/7, no matter what's going on in my life, no matter how tired I am, no matter how hungry I am. You know, if I'm in a good mood or a bad mood, it doesn't matter. I've still got to make a decision that's going to impact her forever, which is awful and beautiful at the same time. And, you know, at first I didn't think I was ready for this. I thought, you know, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with making such important decisions on a consistent basis for somebody who, you know, I care for. And I found that I was ready because of the experiences at this school and the experiences I've had in the past. They prepared me. You know, they got me ready for it. And one of the biggest things for me, one of the biggest shocks, is that my instinct was to protect her from everything. And, you know, quite often I try to protect her from herself, which is, I think, one of the greatest failings of most parents. You know, they should protect their children. Every parent should protect their child. But then they go too far. They protect their children from themselves. They never afford them the opportunity to make mistakes, to screw up, and have to deal with the consequences of that. And I think that's why most young adults are just not prepared for the world, is because, you know, they the whole time they go through these extremely regimented schools, and their daily life is just not up to them at all. So they don't worry about it. Anytime anything goes wrong, it's not their fault. You know, it's a teacher's fault, or it's a parent's fault, or it's someone else's fault, you know, another kid at school. Here, everything you do every day is watched by other people, and they interact with you and they help you, but at the same time they hold you accountable for your actions, which is awful. I mean, it's just so bad. I was constantly in trouble as a child. I was just always in trouble. But it helped me, because at the same time I was working as a juror in the Judicial Committee, and I had to decide whether someone else's actions were right, or if they were wrong, and if they should be punished for it. And this was all based off of a system that we had all, you know, had a hand in creating. And that's huge. As a child, to have just as much responsibility as an adult, I think it's extremely important. And it helped me at a very young age to decide on things that I now have to decide for another human being, you know, whether or not they're right or wrong, whether or not they're good or bad, whether they're going to benefit her in the long run. And I find the more time goes by, the more freedom that I give her. And the more she gets in trouble, the more she does the wrong thing. But at the same time, the more she learns, the more she builds life experience so that she can make those decisions for herself. And she can be a resourceful and happy and healthy adult when the time comes. And it's really one of the things that I have this school to thank a lot for, as well as the people that I went to school here with. I mean, they helped to make me who I was, and they forced me to take accountability for my own actions on a regular basis, which was quite awful. But at the same time, it helped prepare me to be an adult, and helped me understand that as I work as an adult, my job with her is to prepare her for the world, you know, to get her ready for it, and hope that she can deal with anything, not to protect her from it. Because in the long run, if I protect her from everything, all I'm doing is opening her up to get hurt in the future. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. I just think that that's one of my, you know, biggest fears in life, is that I won't be a good parent. And at the same time, I think that's probably part of what makes me a good parent, is that I fear that I'm going to do the wrong thing, but at the same time, I live with my mistakes, and I try and do better each time, and I afford her the freedom to make her own decisions. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Aubrey Alford, our next speaker. Thank you.
I'll probably just stay sitting down, but my story is about the process of buying a home with my husband, Andreas Suter, fellow alumni. We graduated together in 2008. And we've been living in our home since July of last year. And this all started last February. We had been renting a house in the mountains for about 3 years, and we were very settled and comfortable and happy there. And we had just started talking about the possibility of buying a house sometime in the next few years, started saving and planning in that direction. And shortly thereafter, we heard from our landlords that they were planning to sell the house that summer. Some plans had changed on their end, and it was a bit of a shock to us because we thought that we would be able to rent from them indefinitely. But it did raise some interesting questions about what to do next. While the house was comfortable, it really wasn't what we were looking for in a house to purchase. For example, we wanted property for horses and usable space for a garden, and it was quite steep. It was a beautiful foothills home, but it wasn't really suitable for our longer term goals. On the other hand, it was really tempting because the owners had said that they would work with us on the price. We were, as I said, very comfortable there. And it felt very much like home already. So it was a bit difficult to imagine uprooting ourselves and moving on to something kind of unknown. So then we started looking at where else we could rent, because it was very important to us to live in the mountains. And we realized pretty quickly that we couldn't find a house that we would be really happy renting in the mountains, or that it would be very difficult. There just aren't very many rentals available. So we thought about it quite a bit, and in the end we decided that the drawbacks of the property really outweighed the benefits of staying there and going with a comfortable, easy route of just staying put. We knew that we were signing up for some uncertainty, but we went with it because we wanted to make the right decision for the long term. So although we had really just started thinking about buying a house, I started to look a little bit more into that possibility. And I found through some research that we were able to, through some programs, put less down on a house than I had thought we would have to. And that kind of opened up possibilities. So after doing quite a bit of research on our own, we contacted a mortgage broker and discussed the possibilities with him and got pre-approved for a mortgage. And next thing we knew, we were heading down the path of homeownership a lot sooner than we thought. So we moved in with my parents and saved really aggressively for a few months. And by the time we got close to having what we needed for a down payment for a house in our price range, we started engaging a buyer's agent and touring houses and thinking really hard about what we actually wanted in a home, which was an interesting process of negotiation and conversation between the two of us. So again, working with that buyer's agent, we had done a lot of the research on our own. We knew a lot of what we wanted, and we acted pretty independently, but we had an expert resource to consult, which I think is a pretty common thread through education at AVS. And we had the usual stresses that most people have when they're buying a house. We had one that was perfect and we couldn't get our offer in fast enough. We had one that we put an offer in on and that didn't pass the inspection. And then finally, the one that we went with, we've lived in since July. And there are a few things that I've noticed about this process that I really attribute to my time at AVS, and credit AVS for giving me the skills to navigate through all of that. First, I was able to accept some discomfort with uncertainty. We forewent the easy, comfortable path of staying, and we wound up with something that we're really a lot happier with than I think we would have been. And here at AVS, I think that students are really in charge of their lives, and embracing uncertainty just becomes a certain nature. In order to move forward in anything that a student does here, they have to take risks and accept that they'll just have to learn and adapt as they go. And again, that's just really increasingly ingrained as you go through your years here at the school. I also felt very comfortable doing independent research and consulting experts when I felt that I couldn't make enough progress on my own. That's how I think most structured learning goes on at this school, is a student pursues something until they feel like they can't go any further on their own, and then they might find another student who's interested, and they might just work on it together, which is what I did with Andreas for a while. And then eventually they might decide that they need an instructor, and they might source one in a variety of ways. But again, I kind of think that's what I did with the mortgage broker and the buyer's agent. And I think also very importantly, I was able to negotiate priorities and what we were looking for with Andreas. And I think this has a lot to do with experiences that we all have at AVS, making decisions that affect other people as a group. And this can range from ordering pizza for lunch and figuring out what people will actually want to eat, versus, and it goes all the way to coming to a common understanding of a law or what someone's sentence should be in the judicial committee. And also, I think students at AVS talk a lot. I think sometimes the conversations are deliberately and delightfully frivolous, and sometimes they are things that people are really passionate about and care deeply about. So I think there are huge skills gained through just those regular interactions in learning to understand what people are really saying and communicating effectively what you mean as well. So that's my story, and those are my observations. Thanks for listening.
Next we have James Gashabos.
Hello. I'm the youngest graduate on this panel this evening. So when I was asked to do this, I was a little bit dubious. I knew Ready for Everything really applied to me. I knew I had that skill, but I didn't really think of anything that I had used it for. You know, I hadn't done much yet. But in spite of my apprehensions, I agreed to come up here tonight, and I guess in some way that displays in itself Ready for Anything. But the story of me writing the speech isn't very compelling, so I'll save that for a different time. But I thought about it, and I figured a good place for me to look for examples was with my job. As a bit of background, I work for an IT company as a systems administrator. So the story of how I got this job is yet another thing that I realized as I was going through that would apply to Ready for Anything. But once again, I will preserve that story. You can't have it. Instead, I'm going to talk about my interactions with a software called ConnectWise. After I'd been working at my job for about a month, my boss approached me and offered me the proposition of going full-time, and one of the additional things I'd be doing with this time would be distributing and assigning tickets to myself and coworkers. So anything that came in, like any tasks, anything are attributed to what's called tickets. And this is where your time goes in, where what happened goes in, everything like that. So what I would be doing is receiving them and also sending them out and also working these tickets. So I would be in charge of other people's time that was what the plan was. But I was in charge of, essentially assigning what other people would do. So I thought it was interesting, so I agreed to do it. And this is something that the company had not really done before. Prior to this, it was kind of a free-for-all on our what's called the triage board. So anything that would come in, somebody would grab it and go do it. So having somebody monitoring this was something that hadn't been done prior to me taking on this task. So I went for it, and it was kind of, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I haven't ever scheduled another person's time. I haven't ever. I was like, it'll be fun. Let's do it. So I pretty much had a weekend. I had my plan of attack, and on Monday I went in and was like, okay, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and I'm going to go through these 200 tickets or whatever, and they're going to go all these places. So throughout gradually everything got cleaned up, and it's, I've been doing this for a few months now, and it's gotten a lot smoother. It's something will come in, somebody will do it. It's nice. Tickets are closed properly now, at least for the most of the time. And it's really nice to have that, to feel like I did make a change somewhere. But I wasn't ready for it. I didn't think I was ready for it. I didn't think that it was something I would be doing at a systems administrator position. When I was looking for jobs, I was looking for working with computers. I didn't think I'd be working with like managing time. So, and I think that that's something that really, that ABS really does well, is when you can't, if you tell somebody what to do all the time, they're never going to really kind of try to figure stuff out on their own. They're going to try to ask questions, they're going to try to stick to the status quo. But this is something, like I said, had never been done before, at our company at least. So this was something I kind of had to figure out, something that was up to me. And it was, and I think I could attribute that to ABS entirely. My ability to do this. And I think that every student that I've seen, every student that I've interacted with has that ability. So, all right. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Well, now we'll open it up for your questions, so who wants to kick it off? Deborah?
I have a question for Keenan about how your education at ABS served you well in, or badly, probably well, when you were in the Marine Corps.
How my education at ABS served me in the Marine Corps? Well, a little of both. It served me quite well in some ways and quite poorly in others. Something about, just a lifestyle in which I have the ability to make my own decisions to a lifestyle where I more or less don't. I had a hard time adapting to that. But at the same time, I was used to dealing with, many other people on a regular basis. And it helped me with my interactions once I got into the Marine Corps. One of the ways in which the school helped me is that I was used to, at times at least, thinking about how my actions would affect myself and others later on, which saved me just an enormous amount of heartache in the military, as I saw many a young person get in trouble because, they were used to doing whatever they felt like at any moment, and, they never thinking about how these actions could come back to affect them later on. And, ABS and the Judicial Committee and constantly having to deal with basically peers, no matter what age they were, it helped me a lot. So I hope that answers your question. Certainly.
Okay.
Over and over again, I have seen a very high percentage of the graduates return to this school and support it and stay actively involved in it. All of you could be doing other things tonight. What is it? Why do you keep coming back here?
So the question is, why do you keep coming back? I keep telling you to go away.
For me, it's a second family. I mean, I can't imagine not supporting this group of people and trying to extend the school to all of the other young people in my life that I know and want to have the kind of childhood that I enjoyed. I think it's pretty much that simple. I love the people and I love the concept and I want other people to experience it as well.
Do you have anything you want to add, James?
In short, I think the short answer would be I want this place to stick around. I came here about I think it was 7th grade, or I had been in 7th grade and then came here. So I had seen both spectrums, and I can't imagine ever, going back to the way it was for, kindergarten through 7th grade for me. And I don't want other people to be in that. I want as many people as possible to have this experience, the experience of ABS, where, you're free to do what you want to and you make your own choices. So, yeah, and I wanted to stick around. That's why I'm here.
Great question. Yes.
I'm a little bit curious about your judicial committee. Can you give me an understanding, like when you set up the rules as a community, I understand that the young people are involved in making the rules, right? Why is it that some of you get in trouble with the judicial committee?
So Keenan already is jumping in.
Yeah, no. Let's be honest.
Answered
We all know who spent the
Question
most
is
time in
nice,
front
you
of
get in
them.
trouble, Keenan.
Yes. Well, it's because as you know, a child or a young adult, all of us, we had a hand in creating these rules because they're what are acceptable for all of us as a community. Just like basically any judicial system. And the problem is, sometimes I forgot what I had agreed to earlier, and in the heat of the moment, emotion took over. No, but basically, it's they're reasonable rules to live by, and I was a fairly unreasonable and crazy young man, and I think that's the same thing with kids will be kids. They're gonna break rules. It's part of being a kid, just pushing the boundaries and testing them. So I think that's why, though we all had a hand in it, some of us still broke those rules on a regular basis, is because, you got to know where you are. You got to push those boundaries. And so I think it's good.
And just as a follow-up, what do you think you learned from that experience, pushing the boundaries?
That, they're put in place for a reason, obviously, which, actually relates to what I was talking about earlier with Lily. In that, you have to set boundaries sometimes, and I hope she pushes the limits and tests things, but it's infuriating.
Yes.
Keenan and any other member of the panel, do you envision yourself affording your beautiful children a Sudbury Valley form of education, Alpine Valley or otherwise?
So the question is, do you plan on sending your own children to a Sudbury school?
Eventually, for me.
I would love to give my children the option of coming to this school. And I'd hope that they'd take that option. I think it's a great school. But at the same time, if it's not what works for them, then, maybe I'll find something else. But I kind of think it would probably work for them. So.
I would send my children here as well, but that'll be a long time. A long time.
You never know, Jerry.
Oh, God.
Yes.
I often hear when I talk to people about the Sudbury philosophy, because I think it's interesting, what people always say to me is, well, people don't know what they don't know. And, they think when kids grow up, they're going to come across things and think, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was younger. So I wondered if anybody could share something you didn't know that you didn't know.
Yeah, so the question is, did you ever encounter something that I'm going to rephrase it slightly, that you wish you had been exposed to?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody who wants to answer? Maybe James has some thoughts?
I'll answer it. So that's actually something I've thought about a lot, thinking about my past. Is there anything that I wished I had, done or that I had done more of? Because I spent a lot of time at AVS playing video games or talking. And really, looking back on it, I wouldn't change a minute of it. I could have worked on, I have a desire to eventually get into computer programming. I could have worked on it, years ago. But I'm really glad I didn't. I'm not necessarily really glad I didn't, but just I'm okay that I didn't. Because I think that time that I spent doing other things was just as valuable. It made me realize what exactly I want to do. It made me think about, it's there's no sense in wishing to change things when it was valuable. I learned something from that. I had my time of peace and my time of play, and I learned other things. I learned social interaction instead of maybe sitting in the back corner, programming, which I can do now as an adult. So there's no reason for me to regret not doing something when I can do it now.
And I would add, a lack of exposure is really not something that I think of as a problem at this school. When you have such a rich community of people pursuing things they're passionate about, it might be a random mix of things, but there is a constant stream of things to be interested in while you're here at the school. And so I would say no, I'm not, I can't think of anything that I wish I had been exposed to here, because I was constantly exposed to different things. And I think through that process, I built sort of the habit of just accepting that I'm going to learn something new today. And so I've never felt like it's too late to learn something or do something. that continues into my adult life.
Keegan, how about you?
Well, the only thing that I would add to that is that I think one of the biggest fears of parents is that their children aren't going to learn what they need to learn at this school. Which, I'm not going to say that there weren't things that I may have been a little soft on when I went to college. But at the same time, just from living everyday life, I learned all the essential skills that anyone's ever going to need. And at the same time, I was better prepared to interact with the rest of society without getting in trouble. And at the same time, I, along the way, picked up, math skills and reading and writing. I mean, it's kind of, if you live an active lifestyle and you interact with the people at this school, you're going to learn it. I mean, everyone uses a certain degree, and it was never an issue for me. And so that's one of the things that one of the fears that I would like to put down for, most of the prospective parents is that I don't think that you have to worry about your child not getting what they need to get to this school. Yeah, maybe not at the same age that they would have at a government school, but they'll get it. And that's, I think, part of what makes this school fantastic, is it affords you the opportunity to pursue those things at the age at which it's appropriate for you, not when it's being forced down your throat.
And one thing I just would add really fast as a staff member is there's this thing called the internet where things are exposed to you whether you want to see them or not. And I find on a day-to-day basis the kids are showing me things that I didn't know about, like a mantis shrimp and other things like that. And so to me, the exposure isn't even an issue culturally anymore, because you go on Facebook and you can learn 400 things in 5 minutes that you never knew existed. And I just feel like that's worth pointing out too.
I'm assuming your friends are, posting intelligent things on their Facebook.
Well, not always. Sometimes I learn what happened on Jersey Shore.
You never know when that might save your life.
Yes.
What stands out to me is that you all have very good verbal skills. And I know some other graduates from the program that you speak very much connected from your heart, very fluent, very rich vocabulary. You're very good verbally, and I think that has to do with your freedom to be allowed to communicate and talk to people and experience language in a natural way, in a natural setting, rather than sitting and to be quiet and listen.
So the question is about our.
It's not a question, it's more like a comment.
Okay.
That I can really see that there's definitely a gift that has space to blossom. And,
I think we'd all agree.
Yeah, I'll take that compliment.
All right, now we all feel that. Now you can give us a really hard question.
As a parent who has a child who just started here a couple months ago, I struggle every day with, as James mentioned, okay, is all he doing is playing video games at school? And you mentioned, there's something more that you get out of being in the school that you don't get in a more structured environment. So can you give me some sense of, on a daily basis, what would be the 3 things that you walk away with, even if you're playing video games, that you consider to be of value from the school, or even 2? So I struggle. I know that he's getting great social interaction. He's definitely learning how to research. But what I'm struggling with is understanding, how that is going to help long term. I mean, I'm just a parent who's hoping.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what are some things that you took away as a student on a daily basis, no matter what you were doing? Aubrey, do you want to start?
Yeah, I was hoping I would have some time to think about it. That's a really good question. I think pursuing any interest obsessively brings some value in itself. So for me, my obsession wasn't video games most of the time, although I played a lot of video games. It was horses. And I spent all of my time thinking and talking and just being about horses. And so I had internships here, and I think, man, on a daily basis, it's hard to take any particular set of things away from that. But I can say on a broader scale, I had confidence that even though, when I was here at ABS, I was certain for a long time that I was going to be a horse trainer, and now I'm a software tester. It didn't work out that way, but I knew how to learn about something through and through, and I knew that I could be good at whatever I just threw myself at, and I learned how to throw myself at something. So it's really not answering your question, I'm sorry, but that's what comes to mind for me.
I would say that I think that's the beauty of this school, is it's like getting lost in the internet. You start in one place and you tend to snowball, and before you know it, you're someplace entirely different, and you've learned who the 89th king of France was, or some such inane thing. But the thing is, along the way, you start picking things up, and you may start with how are Krispy Kremes made, and you end up in physics. And that's what happens with this school. And that's the beauty of it, is the school helps you learn how to learn. I mean, you start off just, if you started at, for me, I came from a government school. And I hated any kind of classroom work, anything remotely resembling classroom work. It was awful. And I hated it because I'd had these things forced down my throat. But the more time I spent here, the more time I started off playing a video game, and then I noticed, the image in this video game is so much cleaner and crisper and smoother than in this video game, and why is that? And then you get into, pixels and screen refresh rate, and then you start, just going down these graphics engines, and you start learning more and more. And obviously, I don't know a ton about games, but you start learning, via osmosis of just being around one thing and having the freedom to, if something interests you, follow it. And if it doesn't, you can set it aside and come back to it later. And so that's the thing, is it may be, I spent the whole day playing video games. But at the same time, as you're playing those video games, you just kind of end up elsewhere. And that's the beautiful thing about this school. You never know where the day is going to take you. And I feel sorry for my parents, because I went home to them and I explained to them what I did that day. I stood in front of the judicial committee because I ate Cheese Whiz in one of the rooms I wasn't supposed to eat it in.
I remember that case.
Oh, so I once tried to argue that Cheese Whiz was a liquid and not solid, therefore I wasn't breaking the no food rule.
You were drinking it.
I was drinking it, yeah, straight from the...
I won that case, by the way.
Oh my God, handily won that case. I really tried to win that. I am embarrassed. But that's what my parents heard, This ridiculous story about how but at the same time, I spent the whole day understanding how a judicial system works and dealing with it firsthand. And at the same time, I experienced so many things throughout that day that it's hard to quantify, as Melissa said, she loves statistics, but that's kind of not what this school's about, unfortunately, is there are no statistics. Unless you were there all day, which, would ruin the experience of the child, you don't know what they do. And they're going to come home, they're going to tell, I played video games all day. But they didn't tell you that they did that, hour-long stint of learning mathematics so that they could beat this one level, because you've got to use the golden rule to get past this, or some other theorem. You never know. And I'm sorry that I can't give you on a day-to-day. It's not going to happen, because all I remember is playing video games. But picked up other things along the way. I'm sorry, I ramble.
James, what do you think you got out of playing video games?
I think I guess it's kind of expanding on Aubrey's point, but I think the biggest thing I got out of video games was learning my interests and learning how I wanted to manage my interests. I like video games, but suddenly, oh, look at this other thing that I like. I'm going to go do that. And then I might like that other thing more. Or my interest in video games has driven a lot of what I've pursued. And, I guess now my career is now I'm in IT. I like computers for a big reason, because I played video games for my entire life. And it's taught me so much. And it's given me such a desire to learn how they work that's the path I went down. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys don't mind me jumping in one more time, I can tell you one thing for sure that I think benefits every student here on a daily basis. That they are here and accepted every day for who they are. We may say we don't like that behavior, but we never say we don't like you. You are great, you are worthy, you belong here, and you're part of our community. And every single day, they get to be here and know that. And I don't think that we can overstate the value of that experience, even though it's subtle. Yeah.
May I add one small comment to that, Melissa? My Zach knows who he is and feels accepted because every day he's focused on exactly what's important to him, which is something totally opposite of traditional school or even most of our lives as an adult. He comes here and is completely immersed in himself, and that's supported. So he knows from the get-go who he is or who he wants to be for the day. And if he doesn't like the result, he gets to change it up at any moment in time as he builds his confidence, focusing on what's important to him. And I love that. And I see the benefit of it in our family and these beautiful, confident beings. That's where that confidence comes from, the ability to know who you are and where you belong in the world based on your own navigation system rather than everyone else's opinion of who you should be. So I'm blowing on that every day and making that fire burn for him. And I'm taking his lead and trying to remember who I am and reinvent myself. Thank you for that opportunity, everybody, and thanks for feeding my will to support Zach in days when I get nervous, because I still go to that place. Is he getting everything he needs? Is he learning all the facts? Is he going to be able to hold his own in a conversation? Blah, blah, blah. There are lots of things to love in the world. Let him figure it out.
Sure. Mine's still in the womb and I'm freaking out.
Kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it?
Yes.
And also, we would have to ask the same question for a public school setting. What are the two things that the children take home every day from that kind of setting? And they're going to hopefully some things that they take home that are not as pleasant and as character building or as rewarding as we are taught to believe.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Even if it's a test or a test score, what did it do for the child?
As you're talking about that, I recently, because moving many peoples into one home, you have to get rid of things. And as I was doing that, I stumbled upon my mother's cache of all of my homework from forever. And it was interesting. As I was, disposing of a majority of it, I kept coming across these things that I'd totally forgotten about, but these projects that I had to do at school that I hated the entire time I was doing it. And there's some of them that it was obvious that I was with my father as I was doing this particular piece of homework, because I was asked to explain why this particular tribe of Indians were, so good for the land on which they lived. And my response was, I don't care, I don't like Indians. And I turned that in, this went to a teacher and got a grade. But that's the thing is, for the majority of the homework that I went through, I was shocked by how often my work in it was clearly sub what I can do. And I think that's the problem with most structured schools, is that they may learn all the things that they're supposed to learn, but how much do they enjoy them? How much do they retain them? Ask the average adult who's 25 what they remember from their time in an elementary school, and based on schoolwork, nothing. No one I've talked to in college, no one I've talked to after college remembers anything from their elementary school other than I used to play with this kid, or we used to play that game, or I had this one teacher that was awful and forced us to do this all the time. So yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from with asking kids what they bring home from the various types of schools.
I would just add too, along the lines of engaging with a subject that you're not interested in, I think random conversations about what Indian tribes did for the land that they were living on, you might not care, but you're not forced to participate. And you might sit quietly on the opposite end of the table as two students who are interested talk very excitedly about it, And that's fine. You're not expected to participate. But if something does snag your interest and you decide to become engaged in that conversation, chances are really good that you'll suddenly become really interested in whatever the subject of the day is. I think that happens all the time here.
So I have a question of mine that I promise I'll take your questions in a second, but I want to make sure I ask this one because I think it's kind of important with the theme of being ready and being prepared for anything. I'd like for each of you to tell me a time as a student when you faced a challenge at ADS and how you overcame it. And I think those stories are kind of useful. So I think Keenan's the only one who doesn't have his eyes closed, so I'm gonna pick on
Great. Well, the plus side is I could just start my mouth going, and eventually my mind will catch up with the story.
Okay.
No,
leave time for everyone else.
I will attempt to. There was this one time when, as a student, I wanted to learn math, or I should say improve my math skills. I went to, I think, Larry to help me with this. And it really quickly became apparent that I had a long ways to go. And I became frustrated. And screw this. I'm not doing this right now. The funny thing is, I still managed to pick it up. And that's the thing, is like, it was not my intent to learn it. I was so frustrated with it that I was gonna, never touch it again. And I still did. And the thing is that being around this community, I began to understand that, I may have had a problem with it at that point, but, every one of life's troubles doesn't mean you have to deal with it at the moment. You can put it off a couple of minutes and deal with it later, or next week, or next month. Now that's, one of the most useful skills that I've learned is that there are certain problems that take time to work through. And I don't think a lot of adults remember that. They get out into the world and something happens, and they get so caught in that moment that they over stress and get locked on that one thing and get target fixation, and they just can't focus on anything else in their life. And it ruins them. That's awful. I mean, sometimes you got to take a step back and be like, you know what? I'm not ready for this challenge. And reevaluate it or seek help somewhere else, which, I did. So.
And that's kind of being ready.
Right, and that's kind of being ready. I mean, you just, yeah.
Aubrey, how about you?
So when I came to the school, I was 6 or 7. And by the time I was 7 or 8, I really, really wanted to be Judicial Committee chair. And at the time, that meant transcribing everything that happened in the meeting. That has changed. It's much better now. And at the time, you had to do it alone. So you had to do it every single day that there was a JC case, which was most every day, especially when Keenan was at the school. Especially at that time. Yeah. And I absolutely was not ready. I was, at that time in my life, maybe still, obsessed with being adult. I wanted to be a grown-up from the time that I knew what a grown-up was. So it was really, really hard for me to sit through JC and realize that I was not doing a very good job and that I probably shouldn't really be doing this right now. And eventually I did resign because I was staring off into space and not calling on people when they had their hand raised. Completely distracted by whatever I was trying to, think about at the time. So I resigned, and a few years later, I don't have a solid grasp on the time that I had all of my clerkships because I did a lot of things. I held on to that desire to be a grown-up. But I was more ready for it the next time, and the rules had changed, so I could have a partner and we could trade off on different days. And the responsibilities weren't quite so heavy, and I was much more ready to take them on. At that time, I knew what I was getting into. I understood the sacrifice that I would be making in terms of my time, and I was ready for it, and I think I did a much, much better job that time and every subsequent election after.
James, how about you?
I have a pretty difficult time coming up with something, but I hate to go back to video games. But I have one. At least I have one. So one challenge that was when I first came here, my first year, I spent time in the gaming room with myself, my friend Xander, my friend Brett, and Ethan, and my friend Ethan. My friend Ethan as well, not just Ethan. So we at the time we were playing a lot of the game Halo 3, and one of the things that had come out in Halo 3 was Forge mode. And this is a mode where you had a certain amount of money, and you could buy things to build bases with. Well, we made a capture the flag game, and we had so many arguments over that game because we would be building increasingly complicated bases where that would be like pretty much impossible to actually capture the flag from. That it would just go on for like 2 or 3 hours with nobody actually doing anything, just sitting in this room and being like, we're gonna win. So after arguments after arguments and then days and days, we started like formulating rules around this. So I guess our challenge would have been how to have a pleasant game. And we overcame it by eventually, kind of being like, okay, we can't do this anymore. You need to actually have a way into your base. Like you can't just put your flag in a hole. So.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
How hard was it to get to college when they found out you went to separate school?
How hard was it to get into college?
It was an uphill struggle the whole way. No.
Cut that sound right, never mind. Let's try that again.
In truth, I'm not going to say that there weren't any remedial classes that I had to do. I believe there was one. But by and large, I went to Red Rocks, and they had the Accuplacer test at the time. And I took it, and, I had less deficiencies than the average high schooler that had been away from high school for a couple of years. Because most of what I'd learned, I use on a regular basis, and so it was with me. And so I had the one remedial class, and it wasn't too bad. I didn't really have much difficulty with college at all. Outside of college being college and hard, I didn't have much difficulty getting into it. I'll put it that way.
And let's rephrase it slightly. How difficult was it after ABS to get a job with your weird degree?
So I didn't attend college. I went straight into a career, I guess you could say. That's not entirely accurate. I moved to Oregon to become a master woodworker and then moved back and became a software tester. But I found, first of all, college for me wasn't really necessary to pursue what I wanted to do. I found that I had the skills that I needed and was able to convince people of that up front. Finding jobs was actually always, I don't want to say easy, but it was pretty straightforward. Usually all it took was really getting a conversation and connecting with someone, and it was pretty clear that either it would be a fit or it wouldn't. And more often than not, it was clear that it would be a fit. And then within sort of my career, now that I'm into software testing as a career, it doesn't come up. Neither college nor AVS come up a lot. When I do talk about my school, I can only talk about how excellent it was, and I find that usually, just by virtue of the fact of how unusual it is, once I've established some credibility with people and they sort of see that I'm an intelligent, functioning adult, it sort of sets me apart, and they respect me more for coming from this sort of unorthodox background and somehow not being completely messed up.
As if this background would mess you up.
Right. Well, people have strange perceptions of what's normal and what they would expect to see, and I don't meet those criteria.
James, you might have to yell.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, that's about right.
Actually, I would say my experience was fairly similar to Aubrey's, where I haven't gone to college and I don't really have a desire to go. There's nothing I really want to go there for right now. But right now I'm working as a systems administrator, which is what I'm good at, what I enjoy. So I didn't have an issue getting a job in that field, so I'm pretty happy.
We want to wait just a second because I know it's super hard to hear when there's rain on this roof.
Yeah. Exactly. So let's just give it 1 second to see if it dies down a little bit. Sometimes these things pass pretty quickly.
Well, while we're waiting, I was going to say that generally I'm met with looks of confusion. When I tell people about the school that I went to after interacting with them, most people are like, "Oh, but you seem like you've, been to a normal K through 12 system, and you've done all the appropriate tests, and you've gone to college." Yeah, well, sorry to burst your bubble. I went to kind of a different school, and that's the thing is that most people refuse to believe that I went to anything but the typical system, because I really seem no different than anyone else. I mean, maybe a little more outspoken than most. And that is one thing that helped me out a lot and got me in trouble in the Corps, is that I was pretty outspoken. If I had a problem with something, I let people know. And a lot of time the squeaky wheel gets greased, and the problems I had got fixed. At the same time, occasionally that squeaky wheel got a boot, but, it still made my life more enjoyable in the long run.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could elaborate too on the academic test. Did you have to love studying before taking the test?
I didn't actually do any studying before taking the test. And they were like, oh, well, you have to take this test and it'll let us know where you're at. And in truth, I was like, well, I'm going to take the test to know where I'm at. And I took it, and there was only, the one thing that they had any issue with. And even then, it wasn't, like I was mentally handicapped in that one particular spot, so it wasn't difficult for me to catch up. And it wasn't that. I mean, I didn't. And also, when I took the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, basically the "Are you a dummy?" test for the military. I went in there and they're like, "Oh, you went to this school and you don't have an accredited diploma." And they expected me to score poorly, and they gave me a practice test in their office. And I scored in the 70th percentile with a hangover. And they're like, "Oh, let's get you down and get you tested." And then when I went and took the actual test, I showed up late, and not my fault, by the way. The recruiter drove horribly. But I showed up late, and then I made the mistake of flirting with a cute girl in the testing room. I scored in the 90th percentile. So, it's never something I've really had a lot of difficulty with. I'm not overly intelligent by any means, but at the same time, I've never had difficulty with those types of things, basically because anytime I've been given a test, anytime I've had to speak in front of a group of people, I wasn't worried about it, because we test each other all the time. Oh, I don't think you know this. But I can't tell you how many arguments I had over the most mundane of things that really helped me to find out ways to properly defend my beliefs and to, maybe do better research in the future, because I was so thoroughly squashed by my opponent, even though it was an impromptu, you're wrong because of this. So, I'm wandering again. So.
You just started to touch on this. My question was, everybody from the student graduating from school has a tremendous sense of self-possession and confidence. I was just wondering, where do you think that comes from?
So the question is, where does our sense of self-confidence and self-possession come from? That seems to be a trend around among graduates, right?
I would pick up from where Keenan kind of left off. I would pick up from where Keenan left off. Because he was talking about how he got squashed in arguments a lot. That happens. I mean, you have a lot of people who, not everyone who attends the school argues for fun, but I would say a pretty good number of the people who attend the school argue for fun. And losing is good sometimes, I think I certainly was far more comfortable sort of speaking out of my depth on subjects than most of my peers at work, and I think that continues to serve me, because I'll ask questions even if I think I sound stupid, because I want to know. I don't have the inhibitions or the fear that people will judge me poorly, because I really wasn't ever judged poorly here. I was wrong sometimes, and I learned that I was wrong, and then I learned something from that and moved on. and it just always felt like, how I felt about myself and my intellect were in my control. And if I felt like I was scrambling to understand something, I spent time to learn it and become more confident in that subject. And I always felt valued as a person.
James, what do you?
I might say that when you're responsible for your own actions, and everything like self. When I'm maybe getting a different definition of self possession here, but I think that when you're responsible for your own actions, from when you're young, when everything is up to you and what you want to do, when you decide what to do with everything, you get to kind of know yourself. You get to I think that you become a person. You don't lay blame on others. You know if something was wrong or if something was right, and you either go with it, you change it. As a person who knows that, it's really, when a person knows that, it's really, I don't know how to describe it. What are we going for here? But yeah, when a person has that freedom to understand and do them, understand themselves, then you'll see confidence. So, that was a terrible explanation, but
well, and to follow what you're talking about, I think one of the thing that we all have in common is, in order to graduate this school, you have to stand up and let everyone know why you think you are ready to be a productive member of society. Now, you got to stand up and defend why you're ready to be an adult out on your own, in front of a room full of people who know you, and they're going to ask those awful questions. And you're like, really? You got to ask me that? And that's part of it. I mean, we as a community, we prepare each other for it, unknowingly at first, but then towards the end, we knowingly prepare each other to stand up and defend who you are and say, I believe this. Be damned who doesn't believe me. And that's part of the school, is you have to respect yourself, respect what you believe in, and at the same time allow for others to believe in something different. And I think that's one of the other things, one of the key things, is that there's such a diversity of people at this school. And you get every walk of life before they've walked it. And there are disagreements over it, of course, but at the same time, everyone respects everyone else's right to, think what they want to think and believe what they want to believe. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Spending some time defending yourself, but at the same time being supported about it, it's a crazy mix, but it works.
Yeah.
So, by definition, this being a private school, it's really not diverse, right? Because it's only open to people that can afford to pay to be here. So I'm wondering how you feel that impacted your experience. If you notice it, if you reflect on it at all, if it's something that bothers you, that somebody that can't afford to pay for school doesn't have this option open to them.
So the questions around that since this is a private school, people have to pay to be here, and did we feel that affected our education here or our growth here?
Yeah, or just how do you feel about that?
And how do you feel about the
people who can't afford to come here don't have this option?
It's unfortunate that they don't, but the school system sponsored by the government, as they are, use a lot of money to do that set style, which works for some people. But at the same time, I'm gonna jump back a little bit. And I had a friend while I was in the Marine Corps. Got covered in tattoos. He had been on some of the worst streets in his hometown. He grew up in Florida. And, real nice guy. Very outgoing and friendly and a good friend to have. And I knew him for 2 years. And the day he was getting out of the Marine Corps, he confessed to me that his family owned a tenth of Florida. His family were billionaires. He had millions upon millions in a bank account waiting for him that he could have touched at any time. But he never used it because that's not who he was. So I don't really think that, it's unfortunate that some people can't come to this school because their parents don't have the finances to put them here. But I think you can find any walk of life in this school, despite, you know, maybe their parents having the funding at the time to put them here.
And I would add that it has always felt to me like the school's done a lot to try to include people who couldn't otherwise afford to come here. And so, you know, I think it's a broader range than attend most private schools. And yeah, I mean, as Keenan said, it's unfortunate. I'd love every young child or young person to have the opportunity to come to a school like this. And we're not there yet, but I'd love to get there.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more question, so we'll let yours be the last.
Somebody else may have a better question than
I There's no bad questions.
So I just am imagining, sitting here thinking about you all have been wonderful, have been so articulate, and I also think that this audience is very supportive, right? And so I'm imagining, what if we had a sort of general audience here? What kinds of questions might be asked? And I'm having a hard time thinking of what they might be for some of them. But I wonder in your lives, if you have been asked questions that in that moment really have made you sort of step back and go, huh, you know, or have made you upset, that sort of, you know, where somebody is reacting to your background in a way that actually, it sounds to me like any question we could ask you, you'd be able to answer very articulately. But I wonder if there's one that you've ever been asked that sort of made you wonder about your own.
I don't think necessarily that the question itself has ever bothered me, but it's occasionally the way in which it's asked. Because I get a lot of dismissal when I tell people about the school, you know, they just, oh, clearly you're an idiot, you know, you went to a special school. Which, you know, that's honestly the only thing that's ever bothered me about it. I have no problems talking about the school.
Yeah, what happens for me is I tell people about the school and I get really frustrated at their reaction when they say, well, you're special. My daughter isn't smart enough or isn't driven enough to be trusted with that kind of freedom. There's nothing special about me or anyone. I mean, there are special things about me, but I'm not that special, you know. I think that very nearly any young person could absolutely benefit from being here, and absolutely should be trusted with the opportunity to be here. So that's the thing. It's not really a question, but it's just it's something that really rubs me the wrong way when I hear it. The assumption that for some reason this just it wouldn't work for normal kids. Clearly it does.
What about you, James? Has there ever been a question that set you back a little?
Actually, there has not been, but because normally when I talk about the school, a lot of times I have to explain it many times, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, you'll say it once and they'll be like, oh, okay, so you choose your classes, and I'm like, well, you can if you want, but it doesn't, not really. They're like, so like you get free time? So normally I haven't actually had a really negative interaction with somebody, like somebody being like really you know, but I have had plenty of ones where they don't quite understand. Normally when they understand, they'll be either like, oh, okay, and then they'll kind of walk away. Or they'll be like, oh, okay, that sounds really interesting, and then they'll walk away.
Or I always like what grade are you in? I think every student at the school gets that question. Yeah, exactly. I have no idea.
Adulthood? Yeah, you know, to follow up, actually, one thing that you said, one of the things that bothers me the most in the upbringing of Lily is when people in her life are like, she's too young for that. Who are you to say she's too young for that? I mean, you know, at one point we were teaching her coinage and, you know, what coinage was what and what it was worth. And an amazing amount of people were like, oh, she's too young for that. Well, who are you to say she's too young for that? If she learns it, she's not too young for it. You know, I'll show her anything. And if she doesn't learn it at this point, I'm not worried about it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop myself from showing things to her. I want her to be, you know, exposed to the world as it is, so she can learn as much as she can possibly want to learn, and hopefully find something that she loves. And so it's the same thing, you know, is people saying, you know, oh, my child isn't smart enough for that. How could you think that about your child? You're
child's smart enough. Your child's brave enough. I mean, this school is perfect for everybody in one way or another. Now, maybe certain systems would work better for a child because their parents have an easier time dealing with another system, or heck, maybe there's one of those rare children that's like, I need my entire life structured or I fall to pieces. In which case they should go to a school that is like that. But it's just, I can't say that anything has ever bothered me more than somebody saying that someone wasn't worthy of this school in one way or another, or not capable. So.
Well, I want to give a really big round of applause to our panelists.